The billionaire returned home early and found his maid swimming alone. One glance stole his breath. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to tonight's story. It was close to 11 when Ethan Caldwell's private jet touched down at the small runway outside Palm Beach. The night was still, the air heavy with the scent of salt and jasmine. He had told his staff he would not be back until Monday, but an unexpected deal had wrapped early, and he wanted silence more than champagne. After a week of endless meetings and handshakes, he craved the sound of waves instead of applause. The mansion loomed at the end of the coastal road, its glass walls glowing faintly under the moonlight. Ethan stepped out of the black SUV, dismissing his driver with a nod. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. Usually, the night crew would have left by 9, and his live-in maid, Clara would already be asleep in the guest wing. He loosened his tie and headed toward the kitchen, craving a glass of cold water. But before he reached the counter, a sound stopped him. A faint splash echoing through the hallway. He frowned, turning his head toward the open doors leading to the backyard. The pool lights were on, shimmering silver across the tiles. Ethan walked closer, his footsteps muffled against the marble. Through the glass, he saw movement, a figure gliding through the water, hair floating like dark silk under the pale blue glow. For a heartbeat, he thought he was dreaming. Then she surfaced, gasping softly, and he realized it was Clara. She did not see him. Her head tilted back, eyes closed, shoulders glistening in the water. It was late, and she clearly believed the house was empty. She moved slowly, almost gracefully, letting the water trace along her arms, as if she was washing away something heavy, perhaps exhaustion, perhaps the loneliness that came with her quiet life in this house of glass. Ethan's breath caught. He had never seen her outside the crisp white uniform, hair pulled tight, eyes lowered in quiet respect. Now, under the moonlight, she looked young, vulnerable, almost ethereal. He knew it was wrong to stare, but something in the scene rooted him in place, a rare softness that wealth and status had long taken from his world. A drop of water slid from her hair, rippling the calm surface. She whispered something under her breath, but he could not make out the words. Maybe a prayer, maybe a wish. He stepped back, guilt flashing across his face. He had not meant to intrude. Ethan cleared his throat gently and said, "Clara." She froze. Her head whipped around, eyes wide with shock. For a second, the world stilled, the dripping water, the hum of crickets, the faint hiss of waves beyond the fence. "Mr. Caldwell," she stammered, voice trembling. I thought you were still in New York." "I was," he said quietly, looking away to give her space. But plans changed. There was very long in from Dayton. She hurried out of the pool, wrapping herself in a towel, cheeks burning red. "I am so sorry, sir. I should not have. I just needed to clear my head. It has been a long week and—" "It is all right," he interrupted, his tone softer than she expected. "You do not need to explain. I came back unannounced." For a moment they stood there, separated by nothing but moonlight and tension. The air smelled of chlorine and salt, but also something faintly human, like empathy, like the first crack in a wall neither had realized they built. "Next time," Ethan said finally, a faint smile tugging at his lips, "just make sure the security cameras are off before you take a midnight swim. Is that he settable ins? Soft that a profagarin at as a." Clara's eyes widened in horror until he added, almost teasingly, "I am kidding." Her nervous laugh broke the tension, short and unsure, but it was enough. He turned, heading toward the house, his voice low as he said, "Get some rest, Clara. We will talk tomorrow." When the door closed behind him, she exhaled shakily, her heart pounding against her chest. She had no idea that one unplanned swim would change everything, because in that fleeting moment by the pool, Ethan Caldwell, the man who owned half the coastline, had seen something money could never buy: sincerity. And it terrified him more than he cared to admit. The morning sun rose slow and golden over the coast, spilling light through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Caldwell's mansion. The air smelled of coffee and salt. Downstairs, the housekeeper had returned for her shift, but the quiet rhythm of the place was different, charged somehow. Clara Reyes moved carefully through the kitchen, preparing breakfast as she did every morning, though her hands trembled slightly when she reached for the silver tray. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him standing by the pool, calm, unreadable, impossibly composed. She had worked for Mr. Caldwell for nearly 2 years, and he had never once raised his voice or broken the invisible line between employer and employee. Yet last night, something in his eyes had felt personal, almost human. When Ethan entered the kitchen, she froze mid-motion. He wore a gray shirt, sleeves rolled, no tie this time. Without the usual armor of a suit, he looked different, less like the billionaire in magazine covers, and more like a man who had not yet decided who he was when no one was watching. "Good morning, Clara," he said evenly. "Good morning, sir," she replied, eyes lowered. He nodded toward the tray. "That looks good. You made this yourself?" "Yes, sir. Just eggs, toast, and fresh juice. The August no botherations is many classing in do no." He smiled faintly. "You did not have to go this early. After last night, I thought you might take the morning off." "I would rather work," she said quietly. "It keeps my mind busy." He studied her for a second, then sat at the counter instead of taking the breakfast to the terrace as usual. The silence stretched until he spoke again. "Do you swim often?" Her cheeks colored. "Only when the house is empty. I know it is not proper, but the pool helps me think." "Think about what?" She hesitated, then answered honestly. "About my mother. She lives in Tampa. Her health is not good, and I send most of my pay home. Sometimes I worry it is not enough." Ethan's gaze softened. He had built empires on numbers and strategy, but the way she said that, so simple, so unguarded, felt heavier than any business report he had ever read. He said quietly, "I understand what it feels like to want to protect someone you love." She blinked in surprise. "You do?" He gave a small nod. "My mother raised me alone. I lost her before I could tell her I made it." His voice lowered. "I would give every dollar I have to speak to her one more time." Clara's hands stilled on the tray. For the first time, she saw him not as the unreachable boss whose footsteps echoed through marble halls, but as a man who carried his own kind of loneliness. When she finally met his eyes, he looked away first. "Finish your breakfast, Clara. You have done enough for today." She nodded, gathering the dishes. But as she turned, he said, almost absently, "By the way, I may need help organizing a private event this weekend. Something small. Can you handle that?" "Yes, sir," she said softly, grateful for the task. After she left, Ethan leaned back in the chair, watching the waves through the glass wall. He could not shake the image of her in the water, the sound of her voice that morning, the quiet strength behind her politeness. It unsettled him in a way he had not felt for years. Later that afternoon, he called his assistant from the city. "Cancel the decorators," he said. "I will handle the staff assignments myself." "You, sir?" the assistant asked, surprised. "Yes, and send me the files for the foundation review next week." That night, when most of the house had gone still, Clara found a note on the kitchen counter in his precise handwriting. "You are officially in charge of preparing the guest list and menu for Saturday's dinner. I trust your judgment. E. C." She read the note twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket. Her reflection in the window looked different, less like the invisible maid and more like someone seen. Upstairs, Ethan stood by his study window, a glass of bourbon untouched in his hand. He told himself he had simply given her a chance because she worked hard and deserved respect. But deep down, he knew better. Something about Clara reminded him of the man he used to be before the boardrooms, before the billion-dollar deals, before everything turned cold. Outside, the tide rolled against the shore, steady and endless. And somewhere in that quiet rhythm, Ethan realized the world he had built, perfect, polished, untouchable, was beginning to crack in the most unexpected way. He took a long breath and whispered to the empty room, "What are you doing to me, Clara?" In my long strap. The house did not answer, but the silence carried a pulse of something new, something dangerous and alive. Saturday evening arrived with the soft glow of candles and the hum of distant music drifting through the mansion. The private dinner Ethan had mentioned turned out to be more elaborate than Clara expected. He had invited a handful of business partners, a few friends from the foundation, and one reporter from a charity magazine. Yet somehow, the event felt less like a showcase of wealth and more like an intimate gathering. The lighting was warm, the flowers simple, and the air smelled faintly of ocean salt and fresh lilies. Clara moved quietly among the tables, adjusting the placements and checking that every glass sparkled under the chandelier. She wore a modest black dress Ethan's assistant had provided, and though she felt out of place among the guests in designer clothes, she carried herself with quiet confidence. She was determined to do well. When Ethan entered the hall, every conversation softened. He looked striking in a tailored navy suit, his expression calm but his eyes searching until they found her across the room. For a brief second, he forgot the purpose of the evening. He saw only her. "You have done an excellent job," he said when he reached her side. "The place looks perfect. And in percent, it the self anyone." "Thank you, sir," she replied, lowering her gaze. "I just followed your instructions." He smiled faintly. "I gave none about the flowers. That was you." Her cheeks warmed. "They reminded me of the sea. You can smell them before you even see them." He looked at her for a long moment before replying quietly, "That might be why I like them." Then, with a quick breath, he stepped away to greet the arriving guests. As the evening unfolded, Clara remained in the background, serving and assisting where needed. Yet she noticed something unusual. Ethan spoke less about profits and partnerships and more about compassion, about the purpose of wealth beyond accumulation. When one guest laughed and said, "Ethan, since when did you become a philanthropist?" He smiled lightly and said, "Since I remembered what it means to be human." Clara paused, her hand frozen on a tray. His words hit deeper than he intended. Later that night, when the guests had left and the house fell silent again, Clara began clearing the tables. Ethan appeared in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. "Leave that," he said gently. "You have done enough tonight." She shook her head. "I do not mind, sir. It feels wrong to leave a mess after such a good evening." He walked closer, took the tray from her hands, and set it down. "You do not always have to serve, Clara. Sometimes you can just be." Her breath caught. "I would not know how," she admitted softly. He studied her, his voice low. "Maybe I can remind you." The words hung between them like electricity. She looked away, unsure what to do with the sudden closeness. The ocean wind slipped through the open balcony doors, brushing against them both. For a moment, it felt like the world outside had faded, leaving only the quiet space between two people who had spent too long hiding behind their own walls. Then, almost as if realizing the weight of what he had said, Ethan stepped back. "Thank you for everything, Clara. Get some rest." She nodded, forcing a small smile, but her heart was not calm. As he left the room, her eyes fell on the folded note he had written days ago, still tucked in her apron pocket. She touched it gently, wondering what line had been crossed tonight and whether it could ever be crossed back. Upstairs, Ethan stood at the window again, watching the reflection of the pool under the moonlight. He saw his own face in the glass, tired, restless, and no longer certain who he was trying to be. He whispered to himself, "You said you wanted silence, Ethan. Then why does her voice stay in your head, in water depths?" The waves outside answered only with their endless rhythm, as if the sea itself knew what he refused to admit, that somewhere between guilt and longing, the billionaire who once had everything was beginning to feel alive again. The following week, the house felt different. The quiet no longer felt empty but heavy with something unspoken. Ethan buried himself in work, taking calls from his office overlooking the ocean, but his thoughts drifted too often toward the kitchen, where Clara's soft voice hummed while she worked. Clara noticed the change too. He spoke less, smiled less, yet his presence lingered everywhere. One afternoon, while polishing the silverware in the dining room, she found him standing in the doorway. He looked tired but not angry, more like a man wrestling with something he could not name. "Clara," he said finally, "I need you to accompany me to the city tomorrow. It is for the foundation meeting. I want your help organizing some of the volunteer records." Her eyes widened slightly. "Me, sir?" "Yes. You have an eye for detail, and I trust you." The words hit her with quiet warmth. Trust was rare in her world. She nodded. "Of course, sir. I will be ready." The next morning, the drive to the city was long but calm. The ocean highway shimmered under the Florida sun. Clara sat in the passenger seat of his sleek black sedan, her hands folded nervously in her lap. She had never ridden in silence beside him before. Occasionally, he glanced her way, catching her looking out the window with quiet awe. When they reached the foundation's headquarters, Clara stepped out, adjusting her simple blouse and skirt. The building towered high above the streets, glass walls reflecting the morning light. She had cleaned places like this, never walked through their front doors as a guest. Inside, staff members greeted Ethan with polite smiles, but their eyes flicked curiously toward Clara. Ethan introduced her calmly. "This is Clara Reyes. She is assisting me today." His tone left no room for judgment. As the meeting began, Clara sat beside him, taking notes diligently. The discussions about funding, outreach programs, and housing for single mothers made her eyes widen with interest. For once, she saw a part of his world that was not built on luxury, but on purpose. Afterward, as they walked to the car, she said softly, "I did not know you supported so many families, Mr. Caldwell." He glanced at her. "Not enough, I think. My mother always said wealth is borrowed time, you use it to build something that lasts beyond you." That sounds like something she truly believed. She did. He smiled faintly. "She was a maid once, like you," and flashed at Bassadis. The word stopped her in her tracks. "Your mother?" He nodded, eyes distant. "She worked for a hotel in Chicago. She taught me that dignity has nothing to do with status. Maybe that is why I could not look away the night I saw you by the pool. You reminded me of her strength." Clara's chest tightened, unsure what to say. "I am not strong, sir. I just do what I have to do." He looked at her, his voice low. "That is strength, Clara." The ride home was quiet, but it was not the silence of distance. It was the kind that hums when two people begin to understand each other. When they reached the mansion, the sun was setting, painting the water gold. Clara turned to thank him, but his gaze was already on her, steady and searching. "Thank you," he said first, "for reminding me what real work looks like." She smiled softly, unsure how to answer. Then she stepped out of the car, her reflection caught in the glass door, a maid still, but no longer invisible. That night, Ethan could not sleep. He walked out to the terrace where the ocean wind met the sound of waves. He had built towers, companies, and empires, but never connection. Yet one quiet woman had managed to shake everything he thought he understood about power. He whispered into the dark. Maybe it was never about success. Maybe it was always about her. As many Malachi self-for as with a blaying mound, the sea gave no answer. Only the steady rhythm of waves that sounded too much like a heartbeat he could not ignore. A few days later, the weather changed. Heavy gray clouds rolled over the coast, and a soft rain began to fall, turning the sea into a sheet of shifting silver. Inside the mansion, the windows fogged with warmth. Clara stood by the laundry room, folding linens when the sound of raised voices echoed faintly down the hall. It was rare to hear Ethan angry, but that morning his tone was sharp, his patience gone. "I told you to pull out of that deal, not double the investment," he said over the phone. "I do not care what the board thinks. We will not profit from another man's misery." He hung up hard, exhaling through his teeth. Clara hesitated at the doorway. "Sir, are you all right?" Ethan looked up, the edge fading from his eyes when he saw her. "Just business. Some people forget there are things more important than numbers." She nodded slowly. "You do not forget." He gave a tired smile. "I used to, until lately." There was a quiet between them, filled with the steady patter of rain against the glass. Clara's instinct was to leave, to give him space, but instead she found herself stepping closer. "Would you like some tea?" she asked gently. Ethan nodded, grateful for something ordinary. When she returned with the cup, steam curling into the air, he said softly, "You have a way of making chaos feel small." "I do not think I do anything special," she said. "Maybe that is what makes it special," he replied. The storm grew heavier that evening. The power flickered once, then again. A loud crack of thunder made Clara jump, nearly spilling the tea she carried. Ethan stood and said, "The generator might fail if this keeps up. I will check the fuse box." "I can help," she said. They walked through the dim hallway, light from his phone casting shadows on the walls. When they reached the utility room, the wind howled against the windows. Ethan crouched by the panel, flipping a switch back into place. The lights flickered to life, but the moment they did, there was a sound, a sharp crash from outside. He turned quickly. "Stay here." Before she could protest, he stepped into the rain. Clara followed anyway, her slippers sinking into the wet grass. One of the large umbrellas from the patio had been ripped free by the wind. metal rods bent and sparking near the pool's edge where it struck a light fixture. Ethan moved fast, yanking the power cord away before the current could reach the water. The danger passed in seconds, but when he turned back, Clara was soaked, eyes wide with worry. "You could have been hurt," she said breathlessly. "So could you," he replied, brushing water from her hair. His hand lingered for a moment too long. The rain dripped between them, and time seemed to slow. They stood under the gray sky, their faces inches apart, thunder rumbling above. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. "You should not have followed me. I could not stay inside," she said softly. "You were out here alone." Something in her tone, fear, honesty, care, broke through the last bit of restraint he had. For a moment he forgot every rule that separated them. His hand slid to her cheek, cold from the rain. "Clara," he said, her name trembling on his lips. She looked at him, breath shallow. The storm raged, the pool shimmered, and for the first time neither of them looked away. But then, almost as if the world itself intervened, a bolt of lightning struck somewhere nearby, flashing white across the horizon. Clara stepped back quickly, shaking her head, eyes full of confusion and fear of what they had almost done. "I should finish cleaning up," she said, her voice barely steady. Ethan nodded, though his heart was still pounding. "Go ahead. Get dry." As she walked back toward the house, he stood in the rain alone, his pulse echoing louder than the thunder. He had faced boardrooms, contracts, and crises, but nothing had ever terrified him as much as the feeling that had just taken root in his chest. When he finally whispered her name again, it sounded less like temptation and more like surrender. The morning after the storm, the mansion smelled faintly of damp wood and sea air. The world outside looked washed clean, the ocean calm again as if nothing had happened. But inside, something had shifted. Clara avoided Ethan that morning, moving quickly through her chores, her head down, her heart restless. Every time she thought of the night before, her chest tightened. She had seen the look in his eyes, felt the weight of it, and it scared her more than she could explain. Ethan spent the day in his study, pretending to read reports he could not focus on. The memory of her standing in the rain haunted him, the honesty of her fear, the softness of her voice. He knew crossing the line between them would ruin the fragile trust they had built, yet every moment apart made that line harder to see. By afternoon, he could not take the silence any longer. He found her in the greenhouse behind the kitchen, watering the small plants she had grown on her own. The air smelled of earth and mint, sunlight slipping through the glass roof. "Clara," he said quietly. She turned, startled. "Mr. Caldwell, I was just finishing up. I will not be long." He stepped closer. "I did not come to check on your work. I came to talk." Her hands trembled slightly around the watering can. "About last night?" "Yes." He paused, searching for the right words. "I crossed a line. I should not have made you uncomfortable." "You did not," she said quickly, though her cheeks flushed. "It was just unexpected." He smiled faintly. "It was for me, too." He took a slow breath. "Clara, you have worked for me for almost 2 years. You are careful, loyal, and kind. You see people as they are, not what they own. That is rare." She looked at him, her expression softening. "I only try to do my job well." "Maybe that is what I admire most," he said, his voice low. "You never ask for anything. You remind me that being decent does not need a reason." For a moment, the world outside seemed to fade. The hum of distant waves, the faint rustle of leaves, it all felt distant compared to the sound of their breaths mingling in the warm air. Clara lowered her gaze. "You should not say those things, sir. People would misunderstand." "Let them," he replied. "For once I do not care." Her eyes flickered with both fear and something deeper. "You cannot mean that. We live in different worlds. I could lose my job, and you could lose your reputation. And many forget her." He stepped closer, the sunlight catching the edge of his shirt. "Maybe reputation is the thing I need to lose." She shook her head, trying to stay composed. "You do not understand. Men like you can walk away from rumors. Women like me cannot." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He looked at her, realizing the gulf between them was wider than money. It was the kind of distance built by years of being unseen. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "You are right. I never meant to make your life harder." She took a slow breath, then forced a small smile. "You did not." You just reminded me that some dreams are not meant to be touched. And this West is in that of matter for be matter. He wanted to say something more, but she turned back to the plants, her fingers brushing over the leaves like a goodbye she could not say aloud. When Ethan left the greenhouse, the sunlight felt colder than before. He walked down the path toward the sea, his mind a storm of conflict. For years he had believed he could control everything, markets, meetings, outcomes. But now he understood that the one thing he wanted most was the one thing he could not command. Behind him, Clara watched through the glass, her heart heavy. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Do not make me fall for something that cannot last." But deep down, she already knew it was too late. The following week arrived with tension hiding beneath the surface. Clara went about her tasks with quiet precision, careful not to linger in the same room as Ethan for too long. Every word felt like stepping onto fragile glass. The mansion had returned to its polished rhythm, but behind the silence, emotions pulsed like a storm waiting to break. Ethan tried to pretend nothing had changed, but the pretense did not hold. His board members were arriving that Friday for a quarterly meeting, one he hosted at home for privacy. It was meant to be routine numbers, projections, polite conversation, but he could not shake the unease building in his chest. Something about the past few days felt too exposed, too fragile. When Friday came, the house was full again, drivers outside, voices echoing across marble floors, the faint scent of expensive cologne replacing the usual calm of the sea breeze. Clara had been assigned to oversee catering and service. She kept her hair tied back, her uniform crisp, her smile fixed. But her heart beat faster every time she caught a glimpse of Ethan moving among his guests in his tailored suit, composed and untouchable once more. During dinner, one of the guests, a woman named Victoria Lang, Ethan's longtime business associate, leaned close to him, laughing softly. Clara could hear the sound from across the table as she refilled glasses. "You have been distant lately," Victoria teased. "Rumor has it the great Ethan Caldwell finally has a secret." Ethan smiled politely. "If I did, I doubt it would make an interesting headline." Victoria smirked. "Depends who the secret involves." Her gaze flicked briefly toward Clara. The implication was clear. A few guests chuckled quietly. Clara froze for a heartbeat, her face pale. The tray trembled slightly in her hands before she steadied it. She wanted to disappear, but Ethan's voice cut through the air, calm but sharp. "That is enough, Victoria." The laughter died instantly. He continued, his tone cool. "Everyone here has better things to discuss than gossip about the staff." The tension around the table shifted. Victoria blinked, then forced a smile. "Of course. Just teasing." Clara lowered her head, quickly retreating from the room. She hid in the kitchen, her chest tight, shame and anger twisting together. She had worked hard to earn respect, and in one careless moment, she had become the subject of whispered jokes. A few minutes later, Ethan stepped into the kitchen. "Clara," he said softly, "are you all right?" She turned away, gripping the edge of the counter. "You should not have defended me in front of them. It only made it worse. I could not let them speak to you that way. In 1707, in the Markle, they are your world, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice trembling. "And I am the maid who cleans their wine glasses. That is how they will always see me." He took a step closer. "Not me." Her eyes lifted, meeting his. "That is the problem," she whispered. The air hung heavy between them. For a moment, neither spoke. The clatter of distant dishes and the murmur of guests faded into silence. Then Clara drew in a shaky breath. "Please, do not make me a reason for people to hate you. I cannot be the cause of your trouble." "You could never be that," he said, but his voice cracked with doubt. Before he could say more, one of the staff entered to collect dishes, breaking the fragile moment. Clara used the interruption to slip away, heading to the back corridor. When Ethan returned to his guests, the laughter and chatter resumed as if nothing had happened. Yet the warmth in the room felt false now, hollow. He looked at the faces around the table, men and women who respected his power but not his principles, and for the first time, he saw them clearly. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, he found a folded note on the counter in Clara's handwriting. It said only one line. "Thank you for standing up for me, but please do not fight battles that will destroy you." Ethan read it twice, the words striking deeper than any insult he had heard all night. He folded the note carefully, tucking it into his pocket like something fragile. And as the house fell quiet once more, he realized that for the first time in years, He did not care about the deals he had won or the company he led. All he cared about was the one person who made him feel human again and the painful truth that he might already be losing her. The next morning, Ethan woke to a silence that felt different, too complete, too deliberate. The usual clinking of dishes, the faint hum of Clara's voice from the kitchen, were gone. He walked through the hall and found the dining room spotless, every surface gleaming, the morning sun sliding through the tall windows. On the counter, where her note had been the night before, there now lay a small envelope with his name written in her delicate handwriting. He hesitated before opening it. Inside was a short message and a house key. Mr. Caldwell, thank you for everything you have done for me. I am grateful for the kindness you showed, but it is time for me to move on. Please know that I am leaving with respect, not regret. Clara Reyes. He read it twice, then once more, as if the meaning would somehow change. But it did not. The words stayed the same, calm and final. She was gone. Ethan stood there for a long time, the sound of the waves echoing faintly in the distance. For years he had built a life where nothing could surprise him, every outcome calculated, every risk controlled. Yet the quiet absence of one woman left him completely undone. He drove into town that afternoon, his car cutting through the bright Florida heat. He checked the small apartment building where he had known she stayed before moving into the mansion. But the landlord told him she had given notice the week prior. Said she got a new job, the man said, shrugging. Left early this morning, didn't say where. Ethan thanked him, but his chest felt hollow. He drove without destination, passing streets he had never really seen before. Small bakeries, bus stops, families walking hand in hand. For the first time, he felt the world beyond his gates, a world Clara had lived in every day. By evening, he found himself parked near the edge of the city, across from a community shelter bearing a simple sign, Open Hands Foundation. Through the window, he saw volunteers handing out food and clothing. And there, in the middle of it all, was Clara. Her hair was tied back, her clothes plain, her hands moving quickly as she served meals and smiled at the people who came through the door. Ethan sat frozen, watching her laugh with a little boy holding a worn-out toy truck. The sight struck him harder than he expected. She looked alive, more at peace than he had ever seen her inside his mansion. For a moment he almost turned away, realizing she had found something he never could purpose. But then Clara glanced up. Their eyes met through the glass, and the world seemed to stop. Surprise flickered in her face, followed by uncertainty. Ethan stepped out of the car, rain beginning to fall again, light and cool against his skin. She met him halfway across the parking lot, her expression guarded. You should not be here, she said softly. I had to see you, he replied. You left without a word. I left a note. That is not enough, he said, his voice breaking. You do not walk out of someone's life like that after changing it. She looked away, rain dripping down her hair. You do not need me, Mr. Caldwell. You have your world, and I have mine. This, she gestured toward the shelter, is where I belong. He stepped closer, eyes steady. Do you really believe that? That we come from two different worlds and that means we cannot cross them? Her eyes filled with tears. Sometimes love is not enough to build a bridge. For a long moment they stood in the rain, two people caught between what was right and what they wanted. Then Clara took a step back. Please, she whispered. Let me go before we both lose everything. Ethan watched her disappear back into the shelter's light, her silhouette framed by the doorway. The rain grew heavier, soaking through his clothes, but he did not move. He had spent his whole life believing he could fix anything, with money, with power, with will. But now, standing in the pouring rain, he understood what true loss felt like when the one thing he could not buy was forgiveness. A full month passed. The summer heat faded, replaced by soft autumn light drifting through the tall palms outside Ethan Caldwell's mansion. He had returned to his usual scheduled meetings, travel, foundation events, but nothing felt usual anymore. The house remained spotless and silent, yet the emptiness carried her name in every corner. Sometimes he caught himself turning toward the kitchen, expecting her gentle voice, only to be met by silence and the soft ticking of the clock. Every morning he found her note on his desk, neatly folded beside the key she had left behind. He could not throw it away. It reminded him that some things, once broken, could only be rebuilt through humility, not control. One afternoon, Ethan attended a city charity gala hosted by the Open Hands Foundation, the same shelter where he had last seen Clara. He had donated quietly through a private grant, ensuring her work would continue even if she never knew it came from him. But when he arrived, the crowd parted around a familiar figure standing near the stage. Clara was there, dressed simply in pale blue, her hair pinned loosely, a name tag that read, Volunteer Coordinator. She looked radiant, not in luxury, but in peace. She was greeting donors, her smile warm and effortless. For a moment, Ethan stayed in the background, content just to watch. When she finally saw him, her smile faltered, replaced by surprise. She excused herself from the guests and walked toward him, cautious but calm. "Mr. Caldwell," she said softly, "I did not expect to see you here." He smiled faintly. "I am only a donor tonight. You are the one running the show." Her eyes softened. "You did not have to come." "I did," he replied. "There are some apologies that should be said face to face." She hesitated, then nodded for him to continue. "I was wrong to think I could protect you by keeping you near," he said quietly. "All I really did was hold you back. You deserve to choose your own life, and you did. I respect that." Clara's expression shifted, caught between gratitude and sadness. "You taught me something too," she said. "That kindness does not have to be small. That even the richest man can still want to do good for the right reasons." He took a slow breath. "The foundation received a large anonymous donation a few weeks ago. That was you, was it not?" He gave a modest smile. "I only wanted to make sure your work could grow. No strings attached." Clara laughed softly, shaking her head. "You still cannot help trying to fix things, can you?" "Maybe," he admitted. "But this time, I am not asking for anything back." The music changed, a slow instrumental filling the hall. Around them, people began to dance. Ethan extended his hand slightly. "Would you dance with me, just once?" Clara looked at him for a long moment, then placed her hand in his. "Just once," she said gently. They moved together beneath the soft lights, the sound of conversation fading around them. It was not a grand confession, not a promise of forever, but something deeper, an understanding that love could exist without ownership, that respect could grow even from heartbreak. When the song ended, Ethan stepped back, his hand lingering just a moment longer than it should. "You belong here, Clara," he said, "and for what it is worth, I am proud of you." Her eyes glistened. "And you, Mr. Caldwell, finally look like the man I believed you could be." He smiled at that, genuine and quiet. Then he turned and walked toward the exit, the cool night air waiting outside. As he stepped into the city lights, the ocean breeze carried faint laughter from inside the hall. He closed his eyes, breathing it in, feeling something he had not felt in years. Peace. For the first time, Ethan Caldwell understood that true love was not about possession or desire, but about letting someone become everything they were meant to be, even if it meant walking away. And somewhere behind him, under the glow of the lights, Clara smiled, too grateful for the man who had taught her that even the wealthiest hearts could learn how to give without holding on.